Okay, welcome back to the name series. I'm here with Greg Noyes. You might remember him from a previous episode. Hi, Greg. Thanks so much for being here. So, you were here with me a couple years ago. Can't believe it was a couple years ago, but that's how long ago it was. And we talked about this amazing book series that you had recently released. You had set out to write books about old thinkers.
Old thinkers?
Old thinkers, historical
Philosophers.
figures, philosophers. There we go. The last time we went through and talked about books 1 through 5, you had Thales, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and they all asked questions about the ultimate reality. So to be honest with you, this was a great way for me to digest information about
Philosophers
who I had some knowledge of. Aristotle, one of my favorites, and
the one we're about to talk about,
Aquinas is great. And so I already knew about some of these, but you had me looking at your books and I was able to understand it from a different angle. So I'm going to be frank here. This was like really fun to engage with, but it was also, it made me really think, which I think is the point, right? Think like a philosopher, right? Okay, so
we're talking.
Today you're back and we're going to be talking about books 6 through 10. So yeah, I love the size and I love the content. You have 2 versions of these. You have the for older thinkers and then you have some for...
Yep.
Perfect.
For kids, for older thinkers. So the plan is to have 25, 2 versions of each, to tell the whole story of Western philosophy from Thales till today.
Awesome. Do you want to get into talking about something in here?
Sure. Before I do that, I wanted to say this. Someone a lot smarter than me once said that you can't really understand any philosopher unless you understand what problem they're trying to address, right? So this is an overgeneralization, but the first 5 we looked at, the Greeks, they are usually talking about reality. What is reality? What is it, right? And they debated, are we being or becoming? Is everything made of earth or wind or fire or water? And then Plato comes along and he's like, no, there's ideas. Ideas are perfect ideas, and we are imperfect copies. Like, you know what I mean? They're trying to figure out what is reality. These next 5, this is after Jesus comes on the scene. And so really, the biggest names and the biggest minds in philosophy for 1,000 years are the Christians. And so they're asking a different question. They're asking, who is God?
To recap, the first one's what is real?
Reality. So
what is reality?
What is essence? What is behind what we see?
Being, becoming.
What's everything made out of?
And then the next one's is who is God?
Yeah, the questions are now about God. That's an overgeneralization. They're asking other questions too, but God is the focus. And that's because Jesus came on the scene and he said some wild things. He said, basically, I am God, right? He said, before Abraham was, I am. And his, the contemporaries, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they knew what he was saying and they were going to stone him. Like, he claimed to be God. And then he was put on the cross at their insistence, and the Romans did it. And then he was raised from the dead. So say 1,000 people, right? I mean, people saw him and then they wrote about it. And instead of trying to disprove it, they just tried to kill all the Christians instead because they knew something crazy happened. So whether you believe or not, that set the stage for Christendom, right? Which means Christ's kingdom, right? The Roman Empire eventually became Christian after persecuting Christians for hundreds of years, and it spreads through all of Europe, and Christianity has spread, and it is the dominant worldview in Europe. So these great thinkers are trying to sort out who is God, right? What's true about God? And we can look at Anselm, but I want to draw attention to book 7 about Paul.
Okay.
Right? Paul, if you were to ask most people, like, who are some of the most important philosophers, no one thinks about Paul. But Paul has to be mentioned, right? Paul is the architect of the Christian faith in a way. You know, that's not to say that he's God or anything like that, because the claim is that Jesus is God or the Son of God. Paul is the one that straightens out all the doctrine, right? It's like, how does this work? How does sin work? And how are we justified, right? How do we become right with God? Paul sorted all that out. He wrote half of the books in the New Testament. They're his letters to churches and to his disciples, to Timothy, right, to Titus. So Paul is so important, and I really enjoyed writing the book on Paul. And his conversion story is nuts too. You know his conversion story?
Yeah.
You know, from the book of Acts, right? Where he's out breathing murderous threats. It says he's on the road to Damascus to persecute more Christians, and he's stopped in his tracks, and he's blinded, and a voice says, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he becomes a believer. That's a crazy story, to go from Christian killer to super Christian that writes half the books of the Bible or the New Testament. How does that happen?
I love that. It's obviously not by accident, and I think that if you're a deep thinker and you think logically about things in the Bible that you want to make sense of, to me it makes perfect sense that, I mean, looking at it naturally with my natural eyes, it makes perfect sense that God would take someone that is so well versed in biblical scripture and then sees that he still has some doctrine wrong.
Very passionate.
I feel like God chose him for a reason, because God does everything very intentionally. He's very sovereign, and he changes bad things to good. And so when you were telling me that story, it just reminded me of course God would take someone that's so naturally inclined to understand the scripture and to know it really well, and then totally go in there, blindside him, call him out, and then have him live this like radical life. Because I understand that God does that today.
Yeah, it's hard to explain that story any other way than Paul said this is what happened. So.
When you think about these philosophers, they were people that were well read. They read, they studied, and he was super well read. He studied, and yet God had come to him, revealed to him a very different way that caused him to, like you said, write the entire New Testament.
And later in the book of Acts, you know, Paul, he's traveling throughout the Roman Empire, going to Corinth and to Ephesus and even Rome at one point. But he goes to Athens, which of course was the center of philosophy for hundreds of years. And that's what the first 5 books were about. Paul went there and debates with the philosophers in Athens. And the Bible describes those philosophers as Stoics and Epicureans, which is what book 6 is about, right?
Yeah.
So who are the Stoics and Epicureans?
Yeah.
It's just 2 different brands of philosophy, and it really represents worldviews today. Stoics, right? You know what Stoic means, like you're maybe less emotional, very serious. The Stoics were all about proper living, like living right and living with prudence, right? They were very prudential. And Epicureans were the eat, drink, and be merry people, right? We need to maximize our happiness, our pleasure. You can see that today too, that we you don't call it Stoic and Epicurean so much, but same thing today. That's book 6, right? But then book 7, Paul talks to those people. And I have a couple pages that describe what he's talking to them about. And he basically presents Jesus to them. He says, I see that you guys are very religious. You have statues for every god. You even have a statue that says to the unknown God, so that you don't forget one, right? He's like, well, that's the real one. I'm going to preach the real one to you. That's the God that created everything. And he sent his son Jesus, and he proved it by raising him from the dead. And the Bible says that some people believed. Some people scoffed at him. Thought this is crazy. Some said, we'll hear you again on this matter. And some believed.
Yeah.
So that was Paul preaching to the smartest, most learned people, right? So, okay, you wanted to look at a part of Anselm, right? So Anselm, ever heard of him? Before I brought him up, had you heard of Anselm?
No.
So he's lesser known, right? Aquinas is better known, Augustine better known, but this is the guy in between.
So this is after Augustine. So you have Stoics, Epicureans, you have Paul, book 7, book 8, Augustine. This is book 9, Anselm.
Yep.
And then book 10, you end with Aquinas.
So I'll just show you a little part of Anselm here. So he's famous for the ontological argument. So there's classical arguments for the existence of God. The ontological argument, ontology is the study of being, right? So this is the argument from a necessary being. And it's pretty wild. Some people, if you can wrap your mind around it, it's actually a pretty clean argument, but it goes like this. So he says, if it's possible that God exists as a maximally great being, in other words, it's not illogical to think that God might exist in some possible world. So if God exists in some possible world, then he must exist in every possible world, because he's a maximally great being. Because of the attributes of maximal greatness on the previous page: omnibenevolence, right, being all good; omnipresence, being everywhere; omniscience, knowing all things; omnipotence, being all powerful. If it's possible that that being exists, then he must exist in some possible world, which means he must exist in every possible world, because you can't exist in some possible world if you are
that
omnipresent, if you're everywhere.
Maximum,
so you have to
right.
be in every possible world. So if he exists in every possible world, he exists in our actual world, which is one of the possible worlds. So in other words, to sum it up, if it's possible that God exists, then logically he must exist, from Anselm's argument. And then on the next page, there's people that refuted it, right? Gonalo was a guy who said, I can think of the greatest island. That doesn't mean the island exists. But Anselm comes back with, I can also think of an island not existing, right? That's not a maximally great being. You can't think of a maximally great being as not existing because you can't imagine being not being. Then you're not thinking of the same thing, right? So he says you can't compare it to any other thing like an island that you can imagine or not imagine.
So it says, you can't imagine an island not existing. It would just be an ocean. But a non-existing being isn't a logical concept. You can't think of a being as not being. So I like this image that you have. You can put that up on there. And so you have this perfect island image here.
So I had to tap into my, little boy mind there to think what would be like the cool, like Peter Pan or something, like an island with the roller coaster and pizza. And that's not necessarily what Gonalo pictured, but he did mention an island in his counter argument.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just one of many arguments for the existence of God. And of course, other thinkers that we get to later in later books, like Descartes, all the way up to Plantinga, who's still around today, said that's actually a very sound argument. So I was going to say, how the driving question for these next 5 books is, who is God? Right? That question changes as we're going to get to the next sets of books, right? When we get to the modern era, the question is now, how do we know?
Yeah.
How do we know anything? How do we know what we know? So it's a question of epistemology.
Yeah, what I like about your books, and specifically that one too, is that you're always writing, you don't just write from one angle, you write the contrary thought. And like you said, not everyone, like even Paul, when he talked to the thinkers in Athens, some of them received, some of them were like, we're going to think about this a little bit more. Some of them were like, no, you're crazy. Like, no, I don't believe that. So I think part of these philosophy books is that you're going to encounter people that have some sort of truth figured out, and they're going to encounter people that are like, I'm not sure, or I'm still exploring, or
right.
How can we even know? And so I think that's the cool part about the progression of.
And that's why I think that the next 5 are really important, because it's if you don't know how you know what you know, then how do you know that it's true or not?
Yep.
There's talk about ultimate reality back with the Greeks. There's talk about God, and then it goes to how do you know?
I watched a recent podcast with Tucker Carlson and Sam Altman, the founder of ChatGPT, and he asked him probably the coolest questions I think you could ask someone that's behind a force like ChatGPT, which is, what are your moral standards? What are your thoughts?
Yes. Yeah.
And what lens are you using to train these AI systems? And so he's Jewish, and he talked about how he kept saying, like many others, this is what I believe. When you say something like many others, I believe XYZ, these thinkers challenged other people's thinking. I never heard someone say, like many others, I believe, unless you're following Paul's footsteps, right? And you're like in Paul, like Paul said, da-da-da-da-da. But he couldn't, I don't know who many others are. And so I have questions about leaders and today's thinkers, and Tucker did such a good job asking him tough questions. And I think it's tough when you're interviewing someone because that puts you in a tough spot. But it challenges you to think, where do your values come from?
Right.
Where do your morals come from? And what do you believe? I'm gonna start preaching now, but if you say you don't believe, you believe in some moral good, but not everything.
Well,
what's the truth,
That reminds me of 2 things. First, when you say like many others, it reminds me that a lot of these philosophers, they were practicing rhetoric. They were rhetoricians. They were trying to convince, and so they had these approaches to dialogue. And you've heard of these, right? The Greek words ethos, pathos, and logos, right? So logos is appealing to reason, pathos is appealing to emotion, right? To persuade, and then ethos, right? That's appealing to experts. That is to say, well, this really smart person said this, or these people believe this, so it gives credibility to your argument. So I think that's what Sam Altman was trying to do, but I see what Tucker was trying to do too. Yeah. He was trying to say, what is the worldview behind this? Is it a Judeo-Christian worldview? Is it morally relative worldview, right? And I'm going to get to that in later books too about moral relativism. But if you say that all views are equivalent, that sounds really nice. It's like, oh wow, you're very tolerant of everyone and their beliefs, right? But I think C.S. Lewis put it best in Mere Christianity when he used the Hitler analogy. He's like, so if you really think that, then the Nazis aren't bad. Like, you can't say they were bad. And that was fresh after World War II when, Britain had been bombed and they were in war with Germany. You can't say they're bad if you don't believe that there's a standard of good to compare it to that's outside of you and the Nazis. There has to be a standard. And I think that's what Tucker was trying to get Sam to acknowledge.
And also the powerful force that it is, and how important it is that the leaders behind these things, that we understand what their motives are, because if majority of people are using them, if there's questionable things with that. So certainly something to be aware of. And when you look back at, it just reminds me of having a reason to back up. These books are great because they really challenge you to think deeper and think about moral and reality and what's true and what's not, but at a younger age too, which is very important, because there's so many things now that you look at AI, you look at pictures that are not even, we talked about that actress that's an AI actress now, right? So I think these books are coming in at a great time where you can really challenge some of the thinking and have an argument for why you believe what you believe, right? Like everybody, God's given everyone free will to believe what they will. But if you don't have a solid argument, like, be able to substantiate your beliefs,
So on that note, let's do a little thought exercise. We've been dancing around these books and we've danced past Augustine.
Yes.
It's kind of a big deal. I've heard a lot of, not a lot, but enough very smart people say, something along the lines of, if you only could read 5 books, or you're stuck on an island and you only get to read 5 books, they always say Augustine's Confessions. Right? This book called, and he's a long time ago. We do. He was from like 300 or 400, so we're talking like 1600 years ago, or at least. I have read the Confessions, and we do have a copy. Let's do a little thought exercise. This is an oversimplification of what he did, but remember I told you that you can't really understand a philosopher unless you know what problem they're trying to solve. So he came from a Neoplatonist background, so he was influenced by Plato and some of Plato's ideas, right? Hundreds of years before him. Became a Christian and wanted to reconcile those two different worldviews, right? This Platonic worldview and this Christian worldview. So there was a lot of people questioning if you could know truth, right? Which is going to come up with later philosophers as well. But practice this with me if you would. You're going to try to stick to the argument that there is no truth.
Okay.
Get ready? This is what Augustine would do.
Okay.
Do you believe in truth?
No.
Do you believe in absolute truth, like that you can know with certainty?
No.
Okay, and you're sure about that?
No. Let's pretend. Sorry, I wasn't sure. I wanted to say yes for the second one.
So
yes, I'm
say
sure.
You're sure about that. So it's true that there is no truth.
I'm sure about that.
Okay, so it is true that there is no truth.
There's no truth.
Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. See what you did there?
I just contradicted myself.
Yeah. So he would do stuff like that. He would start. Let's start here. He would say, "Let's start here. There is truth." Because if you say there's no truth, you sound ridiculous.
I love how you could say, no, there's no truth. And then when you're like, there's no absolute truth, I was like, yes, there is. No, there's not.
We're just role playing.
Yeah.
So he would do stuff like that. And he would also just look at numbers. 1 + 1 is 2. This is perfection. Like with math, and that's a simple example, right?
Okay.
But with any mathematical concept, to know that there's perfection, like a perfect answer, right?
That's
with
correct.
Geometry as well, right? Perfect 3-sided triangle, right? An equilateral triangle. Like the idea of just perfection with numbers points to God, right? The idea that there is perfection suggests that there is a standard of perfection to compare that to. Why else would there be such a thing?
Yeah. That first example is really good.
Yeah, the truth one?
To say there's no truth.
Yeah.
There's no absolute truth. Yes, I'm sure about that. How are you sure?
Yeah. Augustine's great. really, really good stuff.
Partnering this with the history series that we're doing in the new series is extremely helpful for me because I've helped you edit some of these books and looked at them, and so I feel like now I have to go back to these. We're on book. What book are you on now?
You and I are working on editing somewhere around 18.
Book 18. Yeah.
So David Hume.
We're close to 25, yeah.
And then into the French Revolution a little bit,
Yeah. Really cool. Really good books, Greg. Really exciting work that you're doing. I know that I talked to you about your process and how you prepare to write these books, and you mentioned that you consider the entirety of the project in your mind and plan it out, because part of the challenge with digesting, you can read huge texts on philosophers and history, reports and things like that. So you're free to be able to, like you said, iron these things out. It's not just ironing. Like you had to create you had to go get the shirt made, and then you had to figure out which pieces go, where the sleeves go. You had to figure out a lot to even just get this to conception. So I think it's extremely well done. And
well, also to go with that analogy, I iron it out, and I think it's ironed out really nice. And then you come along and you turn the shirt over, and you show me that there's still a lot of wrinkles in it. So I think that even though in my mind I finish a page and I've gone over it many times, and I'm like, this is what I want it to say, and this is what I want the image to show. You come along, and I need you to do that. I don't know it at the time, but you just see a page sometimes, and you're like, I'm not even going to read it yet. This is all wrong. You just don't like how it's laid out or something.
Yeah. Well, I talked about how
you're almost always right. Sometimes I explain. I'm like, no, look where the next page is going, and you go, oh, I see what you're trying to do. But a lot of times, when you immediately see an issue, it's probably something wrong. And so you've made a much better product.
We do little tweaks. Yeah, I've been an editor my whole life, basically. I had friends in high school and middle school asking me to edit their papers.
They bring you a sandwich and their lunch money?
No, some of my friends out there, no, they wouldn't pay me. They would just be like, can you have time to look at my paper, my report? And I'd be like, yeah, I do. Got you. So yeah, editing some of these books with you have been a lot of fun. I think these are, like I said, timely, they're fun, they're engaging. I read a page and I'm just stuck on a page for a while because I really just want to explore what it means. And I think that for your kids, for yourself, it's a fun thing to explore. So they're listed on Amazon. If you guys have time, go out there and see which titles and which books speak to you, and download and order it. They're not available to download. You just order the hard copy, right?
I think I'll have them available to download as well.
Yeah, they're cool books. This named series highlights people from different industries. If you have an industry that you're interested in highlighting a success story, how you got to doing what you do. As you guys know, Greg's an educator and he's a historian, and he's been writing these books for a while as a side project. And so, if you have a story, something you want to share, and want to be on the podcast, I'd love to interview you and talk about your business. Thanks so much for being here, Greg.
Can we get back together for the next 5?
Absolutely.
Very soon?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do another episode and we'll talk about the next 5 books.
Some Renaissance, some Revolution, some Descartes, some Pascal. Let's do it.
Thank you guys for being here again. Thanks for supporting the channel. Thanks for engaging, and I'd love to hear comments and feedback. Until next time.